I know a lot of times when people hear research, eyes roll back in people's heads, eyes glaze over. Don't let the word research fool you, or don't have a preconceived notion about what that is. If you're a farmer, if you're a livestock, if you raise cattle or goats, you're a researcher just by you doing and tinkering with things on the farm. That's how a lot of farming innovations has come back, not out of laboratories, but because the farmers said, I have a problem here. I need to try and figure out a better way to do this, a way to solve this problem.
In this episode of Voices from the Field, NCAT Sustainable Agriculture Specialist Felicia Bell continues her weekly Wednesday workshop, webinar, and podcast series by spotlighting the grants available from Southern Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, also known as Southern SARE. Felicia enlists the help of Southern SARE's 1890 land-grant institution liaison, Brennan, Washington. He lays out the production and research grants producers could be eligible for, as well as other funding Southern SARE offers. Felicia and Brennan also give some tips about preparing to write a grant proposal and discuss other resources Southern SARE has available. Let's listen.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Felicia Bell, Ag Specialist for the Gulf States Regional Office of the National Center for Appropriate Technology. Today, this is our weekly Wednesday workshop. Most of you are familiar with it. During the pandemic, it was something that I put on and wanted to do to help our farmers get the information. I've been able to keep this particular platform for our farmers and for our ag professionals across the country. So I'm very, very glad to be here in 2023, able to offer this to you. Today we have a special guest that have really, really helped many, many farmers across the Southeast, in the Virgin Islands as well, and I'll let him get into the exact locations, but have helped many, many farmers. Definitely want him to share the entity he's involved that's allowing this to happen. We as farmers, we need all the help we can get. Brennan, Washington from SARE. So, Mr. Brennan, if you can come forward and introduce yourself, and then I'll let you take it away to share what SARE has to offer.
Well, thank you, Ms. Felicia. Thank you so much for this opportunity to get in front of your farmers. I always enjoy when I got a chance to speak to them because farmers are the foundation of our agricultural system, and Black farmers especially. We need to make sure that we are reaching out to them and helping them as much as we can so we don't become extinct. But my name is Brennan Washington. I am the 1890 land grant liaison. Well, first of all, I'm a farmer. I always like to lead off with I'm a farmer. My wife and I have owned a farm above Atlanta since 2000. I think we officially became professional farmers in 2006. So our farm is Phoenix Gardens, and we just got a little small place, and we do diversified vegetables and all that good stuff, sell at farmers markets and all that good stuff. But I'm coming to you today as the 1890 land grant liaison and the Southeastern Outreach Coordinator for Southern SARE. And for those of you who don't know what SARE is, SARE stands for Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. We are the arm of the USDA that funds the bulk of research and education around sustainable agriculture. And in the South, Southern SARE is managed through the University of Georgia, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, in cooperation with Fort Valley State University and the Kerr Center for Sustainable Agriculture in Oklahoma. We were authorized in the 1985 Farm Bill, and our goal is to support farmers, researchers, educators to explore sustainable ag practices. And the primary way we do that is grants. Sustainability, Ms. Felicia, it means different things to different people. So, and we understand, just like organic, a lot of people have different opinions about what organic really means. Well, the same thing goes about sustainability. But I'll tell you what we consider sustainability. We consider it consisting of three pillars. The first one is environmental sustainability and environmental stewardship. That means that as farmers and ranchers and producers, that we are farming and raising animals in such a way that we are protecting our soil, our water, and our air, that we're not degrading those three things through harmful farming practices. So we're making sure that we keep cattle out of our water, out of our waterways. We're making sure that we don't continue just to till up our soil without turning around and building soil health at the end of the day. So that's environmental stewardship. So that's one pillar. The second pillar, and this is one, and I know this is one that's very dear to you, Ms. Felicia, is profitability. This is a business for farmers, and farmers can only be sustainable if they make money and they are able to continue their operations from year to year. So we place a lot of emphasis on, is this good for farmers, and is this making farmers sustainable over the long run? It doesn't mean that you have to be a hard, cold, money above everything, but it just means that farmer, if you're a farmer, you can take care of your family, you can pay your bills. So profitability and financial sustainability is the other pillar. And the third pillar is what we call quality of life. What this means is that we are farming and ranching in a way that we are contributing to the quality of life in our community. And Ms. Felicia, I know you work with a lot of folks in rural communities. And as farming you think about farming 10, 20, 30 years ago, and you look at a lot of our rural downtowns, they used to be really bustling places, because you had a feed store, you had a fertilizer place, and you had all of these different elements of the agricultural system that contributed to the health of the community. As farming has become more consolidated, unfortunately, we've seen that quality of life go down. Hospitals are closing. A lot of those farm-related businesses have closed up shop because it's only the big guys around and they just do it for themselves. So we always look for quality of life aspects within it. And it's one that we don't generally talk about as much, but we really need to talk about it because our rural communities are having all kinds of problems, and we really need to look at our agriculture from the point of, is it supporting our local communities and improving the quality of life of the people who live there? And above all, Southern SARE is probably the most farmer and rancher-centric program that you will find coming out of USDA. And everything we do, we take the viewpoint of the farmer and the rancher first. That's the lens that we view everything through. So, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. So where does Southern SARE operate? So if you were to get a map of the United States and put it in front of you, and starting with Florida, you look at Florida, you go all the way up the east coast of Virginia, you come all the way across to the west to Oklahoma, down to Texas, back across through Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, back to Florida. That, and any state within that area, that's what Southern SARE's territory is. And then add on to that the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. So in terms of land mass, I think we're probably the second largest area within the SARE universe, probably without the West. The West probably has much larger land masses, but I'm almost certain we have more farmers and producers within our region. Like I said, the primary tool that we have is grants, and we center everything we do, first of all, through farmers and around those three pillars of sustainability that I just talked about. So the SARE program is national, and we get our money from USDA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, or NIFA. We get our money from USDA, but we are not a USDA program as you would think that NRCS or FSA is. We're not a USDA agency. What NIFA does with the money is award it to what's called a host institution in each of the four regions. And those four regions are the Southern region, which is where we're in, Northeast, North Central, which is the Midwest, and the West. Those are the four regions. And within those regions, there is what's known as a host institution who's basically selected to run the program, to take the money and run the program. So in the Southern region, The host institution is the University of Georgia in partnership with Fort Valley State University and the Kerr Center for Sustainable Agriculture in Oklahoma. Those three institutions sort of handle the nuts and bolts of running the programs. And all of the reviews and stuff that we do as far as our grants are all conducted by subject matter experts, farmers, ranchers, producers, researchers within the Southern region. So SARE has values that we try to adhere to. So we definitely want to make sure, I've been working around ag for quite a bit, and I think the SARE program is probably, we were talking about inclusion and diversity before it was even a thing. Now it's all the rage right now, but we were actually talking about this stuff before it was fashionable to do it. In fact, even looking at the SARE regions, my position, which is to work with our 1890 land grants and nonprofits within the South with a particular focus on farmers of color, Black and brown farmers within the South. My position does not exist anywhere else within the SARE universe. So Southern SARE has been looking at the stuff because of its unique placement within the Southern region, being in the South, and a lot of the historical stuff, both the trauma and a lot of good stuff too that happened down here because we're in the South. We've been doing for a while. So we've been doing inclusion, we've been doing diversity. We tried to be as transparent as we can with our programs. And we really try to drive innovation with our programs. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So for Ms. Felicia, for your listeners, for example, who are raised small ruminants, so goat, sheep, which a lot of Black and brown farmers raise because there's a lower barrier to entry than, say, getting into cattle. We do have Black cattle farmers throughout the South. I don't want to give them short shrift, but a lot of our Black producers, livestock producers in the Southern region have raised goats and sheep. And the 1890 universities, our land grant universities, so the Fort Valleys, the Tuskegees, the Virginia States, and the Langstons of the world, Southern University, they have probably set the table and done the bulk of small ruminant goat and sheep research, small ruminant research in the country. And they did that through applying for funding from our program. We have historically supported their research. There's currently a 10-year small ruminant program research project that's being conducted by a consortium, a group of 1890 universities looking at the whole gamut of small ruminants, everything from parasite, how to deal with parasites, feeds, different types of feeds, meat quality, all the way up into marketing, processing and marketing small ruminants. That's a 10-year project. I think they're in the second year or third year, maybe. COVID, they got it right around COVID, so they threw them back a little bit. But that's what we're talking about, innovation. Our universities, Black universities, are innovative. You know, they just need to have especially the financial support to help them do the work that they can do to assist, especially Black and brown farmers throughout the South. So those are the values that we sort of hold together. Before I go any further, I just want to tell you, I had mentioned that SARE is farmer-centric. You're not going to find a program that is more geared by and guided by the needs of farmers and ranchers. And one of the ways we do this, so how we govern is we have what's known as administrative council that basically sets the table for what SARE is going to do in the Southern region. And so they do everything from deciding what grants get funded, what new programs we're going to do, what type of sponsorships we're going to provide in the region. Everything is done through the approval and the guidance of that administrative council. Now, going back to the farmer-centric, I think there's 25 administrative council members. We're thinking about expanding it once again to meet the needs of what we think our stakeholders require. but there's 25, and 7 to 8 of those are actual producers. So we have farmers, we have ranchers who actually sit on this administrative council and help make decisions about where this money goes and how it's being brought to bear for farmers in the southern region. The rest of the seats on the administrative council, we have seats for land grant representatives, both from the research side and from the extension side, both for the 1862 and the 1890s. We have federal agency representation. So we have nonprofit representation. So people who are running nonprofits within the South that work with farmers. I think there's 3 search. We have an agribusiness seat for anybody who's running any type of agribusiness. That seat is currently held by a person who runs a food hub out of North Carolina. So the idea is that we're pushing decision making down as close to the farmer's bird's eye view that we can do. So if any of your listeners, Ms. Felicia, and I'll give my contact at the end, we are always looking for members to sit on our administrative council. 2 new seats we are thinking about adding is one for urban agriculture, a representative to represent the needs of urban agriculture throughout the South. And we're thinking about adding a seat for food justice and food and social justice. We're still trying to figure out exactly what that means and what type of person would fulfill that. But it's mainly to make sure that we are seeing equity in our food system when it comes to not only farmers and how farmers are able to access resources, but also consumers, are the outputs of Black farmers reaching Black communities. So those are 2 seats, and we're always looking for people to join our administrative council. And the administrative council meets twice a year, once a year in Atlanta, and that's our heavy lifting meeting where we make decisions on grants. And then we meet again in the summer, and that's a meeting we move around the Southern Territory. Last year, I think we were in Tennessee. We were in Tennessee last year. So having said all that, our primary reason for being is to provide grants. And we have several basic grant programs that pretty much each region pretty much has the same sort of grants. It may vary from one region to another. But I'm going to tell you about the grants in our region. There is research and education. And within that program, it's actually 2 grants. It's the R&E, which is a research grant that has an educational component built into it. And it's just a straight education grant, which is just any type of training program, particularly for farmers or ranchers. We have our professional development program. That is we call that our train-a-trainer program. So that is not for farmers per se, that is for folks who train farmers. So it's to train people who train farmers is our professional development program. The one that's probably going to be of most interest to the people listening to this podcast is our producer grant. And that is a grant program aimed specifically at producers, and farmers and ranchers can apply for money to do some self-directed research on their own farm. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that means in a minute. We also have grants for graduate students for them to do some self-directed research. And we also have our on-farm research grants, which is closely aligned with our producer grant program, and I'll explain the difference in a minute. R&Es I'm not going to go into too much other than to make sure that you know what they are. They're for researchers, government agencies, NGOs, and it really looks at a particular research question. It awards, you can get up to $400,000 up to 3 years of research, and it has both a research component. So some of the stuff, I mentioned earlier about the small ruminant research. So a lot of folks, some 1890s have gotten grants to look at different types of parasite mediation programs and small ruminants, and that type of stuff. And then once they get the results of their research, then they have to go out and do outreach with farmers to let you know, this is the research that we did, and this is what happened. Why I'm telling you about this program is even though you, as a farmer producer, you can't apply for this directly, you may see a particular need within your community for a research project. You may be having a specific problem. You may be looking at a new variety of a different breed of sheep that you wonder if it will do well in the South. You may be wondering around with climate change, you may be wondering if there are new crops that you can grow on your farm. While you can't apply for this yourself directly for these larger grants, you can approach your 1890 universities or your 1862 universities and say, look, this is an issue we really like somebody to take a look at. So those are the research and education grants. Now I said within that program, there's an education only grant. And how this came up, once again, SARE really listens to our stakeholders, and whenever possible, we try to make changes, and we try to make immediate changes and not wait 2 or 3 years. So a few years ago, our nonprofit partners said, look, you know, you have this research and education grant, but we can never get any of that money because we're not researchers. You know, we don't do research, we do education and outreach. And by you having that research component, you're sort of keeping us away from that pool of funding. And what can you do about it? So we were tasked to come back to see if it was a problem in the region. We saw it was a problem. That was a legitimate complaint. So we created these education only grants, and that's developed for specifically for nonprofits or community-based organizations, although 1890s and land grants can apply for it, but it was really developed with our nonprofit partners in mind. And it encourages education, outreach-based activities to promote sustainable agriculture. So what are some of the stuff that we've done education? We just awarded a grant to an organization in South Carolina. They're setting up what they call a tree farmers, young tree farmers, where they're going to set up a summer camp to teach youngsters, young tweens, and younger kids about forestry. And they're going to be teaching them about forestry, and they're going to have a summer camp where they're going to teach them about all aspects of forestry and how it relates to things like land ownership and why it's so important, for example, Black farmers to really get a hand on their forestry thing. So we've funded that. We've funded some outreach out in Puerto Rico around getting the community to learn about what sustainable agriculture is. So that's what this money's for, and it's specifically to do the outreach and education. So if there's something that you feel you can use some education on, I am really hot to trot now on a value chain component. So meat processing, vegetable processing. As a community, we need to own parts of that value chain. That is where generational wealth is going to be built. We just can't take our vegetables and our animals to the farm gate and then hand them off to some people who don't look like us. You know, we have to own those parts of the supply chain. So we're going to start doing some education around how do you access the money? How do you do business plan? What does a poultry processing plant look like? And those type of things, and education around those. So that's what our education grants are for.
NCAT's Growing Hope Conference is sponsored in part by Rural South Institute, a nonprofit organization honored to be part of the efforts by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to assist military veterans reintegrating into civilian society as they retire or return from active duty abroad. Through grant funding from USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture, RSI offers mentoring services, training, education, outreach, and technical assistance to veterans and their families in Alabama. RSI was conceived in 2018 and born out of the need and desire to assist underprivileged youth and economically depressed communities. The Institute is dedicated to protecting the environment, guiding and educating youth, and cultivating the next generation of minority farmers and rural entrepreneurs. For more information, visit the Rural South Institute's website at ruralsouthinstitute.com.
I'm going to talk a little bit now about the grants that I think is going to be of particular interest to the people on this call, and that's our producer grants and our on-farm research grants. So our producer grants, that is a grant that is that's directed specifically to producers, so any farmers or ranchers, to do self-directed research on their farm. So I know a lot of times when people hear research, eyes roll back in people's heads, eyes glaze over. Don't let the word research fool you, or don't have a preconceived notion about what that is. If you're a farmer, if you're a livestock, if you raise cattle or goats, you're a researcher just by you doing and tinkering with things on the farm. That's how a lot of farming innovations have come back, not out of laboratories, but because a farmer said, you know, I have a problem here. I need to try and figure out a better way to do this, a way to solve this problem. That is what true research. I got involved with the SARE program over 10 years ago now. And my wife and I, when we went to market, we like to have our stuff at the high end of the price point, which means we did a lot of niche products. And the things we noted about farmers markets in the South is, you know, what melons do you see when you typically go to a farmers market in the South? Watermelons, obviously. And if you're lucky, you may see some cantaloupes or muskmelons, but didn't see too much other than that. There are probably 5,000 varieties of melons in the world, and a lot of them are very delicious and have everything you would want to have in a market that you would sell at market. They just may not ship as well as a watermelon or a cantaloupe. And so you typically don't see them. And, you know, they're smaller, they could be 2 pounds. And I want to know how come we didn't see these at the markets in the South? And I asked people, well, can we grow these European melons down here? Everybody said, no, well, you can't grow them. You can't grow those Asian melons. And I said, why? Well, we just can't. Well, why? Well, we just can't. And finally, somebody told me about the SARE program. Now, listen to this very closely, y'all. I had never written a grant before in my life. Didn't really know what the grants were. I had never written. Somebody told me about the SARE program. And I went on their website and I applied for a grant to do to see if I can grow European style melons down here in the South. Now listen, never wrote a grant before, and I got $9,500 to do a 2-year trial. That's how accessible this is to us. Another example, there's a young lady in the Virgin Islands. If you don't know anything about ag in the Virgin Islands, almost every farmer, in addition to growing a crop, they almost all have value-added products as part of their farm output. It's just a culture down there. So they do juices, they do jams and jellies. That's just a given that they do that type of stuff. Well, this particular sister, her thing was on these medicinal tonics she would make. And she kept saying, I don't know about, I've never done a grant or a research project before. I said, well, tell me what you wanted to do. So what she told me was that one of her major sellers, tonics that she made, was the main ingredient was basil. So it was a medicinal tonic that she made where the primary ingredient was basil. And what her project ended up being is that she was growing different varieties of basil, but she wanted to know which basil gave her the most bang for the buck when it came to the medicinal qualities that she was looking for. So I finally encouraged her to do it. She wrote the grant. She isolated what variety she had, and she got the University of the Virgin Islands to actually do her testing. So she was keying in on certain medicinal qualities. She got the University of the Virgin Islands to do the testing for her to see it. And that was her project. She was able to go ahead and do that. I think she's done with it if COVID hadn't been done. Another gentleman here in the Atlanta area, we have a problem here with southern blight on beans. And he wanted to know if by using compost teas, if he can cut down on the incidence and sort of beat back that southern bean blight that we experience down here in the South. So he was able to get some money to do a 2-year project. He was able to help somebody help him design the program, and he was able to get the supplies and stuff that he needed, and he carried out that project. So please, people, when you hear research, just don't think of people with white lab coats staring into a microscope. I can't see your faces, but if I could, I'd probably see a sea of researchers right in front of me, because you're all doing different things. A big thing that I wish more farmers would take a look at for potential research projects, if most of the equipment for managing farms and running farms is built for the big guys, I seen combines, they look like spaceships from outer space, they're huge, they're very expensive. But if you're doing anywhere from 2 to 20 or 50 acres, you don't need that size machinery. You may need something smaller. And I'd be really interested for those of you who are fooling around with trying to get some scale appropriate technology that you can use that you're playing around with using on your farm. That could be anything with some tillers that you're messing around with. A lot of folks are messing around in the processing area, trying to play around with scale appropriate things like seed presses and seed cleaners and that type of stuff. Those are all areas that are ripe for research, and I'm sure a lot of you listening to this are already messing around with, but you just don't think of it as research. So that's our producer grant. A little bit more about the producer grant. You can get up to, I think, and I'll have to get with Miss Felicia because we just changed the amounts, but I want to say it's $20,000 if you're a single farmer to do up to a 2-year project. So you don't get $20,000 a year. If you apply and you get $20,000, you have 2 years to complete that project, which makes sense. So for example, if you're trying to trial, a new crop, you're definitely going to need more than 1 year to do it. So you get $20,000 for up to a 2-year project, $25,000 if you invite your neighbor down the street to take part in the project for you. So if you want to, for example, see if you can reliably grow out a good strain and quality of ginger, and you do it on your farm, and you ask Farmer Joe down the road if he will grow some up at well, you can get up to $25,000. What does the grant pay for? First and foremost, it pays for your time. So we always look to make sure that farmers are compensating not only themselves, but if you are bringing in Farmer Joe down the road to help you do whatever research project you are doing, we're going to look to see that you're paying yourself and you're paying your farmers. That's one of the first things we zero in on. And if you're not paying folks, you got to have a really good reason why you're not doing that. Because think about it, if you're spending time doing what needs to be done on a research project, that's time taking away from your normal farming operations. Even though you may consider it the same thing, you are still taking time away from your actual farming income related stuff. So that's the first thing. You can pay for labor, yours, if you need to bring in people to help you, that type of stuff. If you have a smaller piece of property, but for example, if you're doing a cover crop and you don't have a tractor that has a grain drill, you can hire somebody and have them come in and do that stuff. So that's the first thing, labor. You can pay for supplies, any supplies that are related to doing that project. So that could be seeds, that could be fertilizers. If you're messing around with some sort of stuff with small ruminants, it can mean feed for them. And I'll even give you an interesting one. Typically, we do not pay for example, we're not going to pay for you to get a herd of cattle. We're not going to pay for you to put in an entire orchard on your farm. That we're not going to do it. But I had one come up recently where the guy wants to do some education around goat processing and the different products, value-added products you can make out of goats. And they actually put in the price to purchase an animal which is going to be slaughtered so you can do it. We had never had that before, but we checked and that was an allowable expense. Now, we weren't going to pay for them to buy 30 of them and put them out on pasture, but because the goat was going to be used as part of the research, that was an allowable expense. We pay for any type of testing. So I told you about the woman who did the basal testing. Her test that UVI or any labs did was covered. any tests that you may need to do with soil testing. All of that stuff is covered. You cannot purchase equipment, but there's a caveat for that. So one of the producer grants, I worked with these folks a long time ago. The son, just somehow when he was younger, he got into collecting pumpkin varieties from the North Georgia mountains. So he had all of these different heirloom pumpkins that grew basically in the North Georgia mountains. And one of the things, and their project was about, they wanted to produce pumpkin seed oil, because what they told me is that a lot of the pumpkin seed oils, which supposedly are very, very good for you from a health standpoint and from a cooking standpoint, are imported, from China and other places. And they want to see what it would take to produce their own seed oils here. And so they worked out their budget, and we came to the seed press. They needed a seed press so you can press the oil out of the seeds. We could not find one below, I think, $8,000. And this goes back to any of you who looking at scale appropriate, and they needed a smaller seed press than what was being out there being used. But anyway, typically you cannot purchase equipment above $3,000 or $5,000. But how we got around that, you can always lease or rent equipment. So if you're looking for a particular piece of equipment that is more than what's typically allowed in a grant, then what you need to do is look to see how you can figure out how to lease or rent that piece of equipment to allow you to complete your project. So we allow that type of stuff. In terms of managing the grant application, it's very simple. We have an online system. And for those of you familiar with things like grant.gov, some of these other very difficult to navigate grant systems, ours is not that. Like I said, I had never applied for a grant in my life, and I went through it. And most farmers find it fairly easy to navigate and to get stuff navigate. So that's some of the stuff that you can purchase to do your project. Not too much is off limits. It just has to make sense. Is this helping this farmer to carry out the research that he wants to do? So that is the producer grants. You can go to our website, which is southernsare.org, and look at our grant offer, and you can find more information. Our second grant I really want to make you aware of is our on-farm research grant. Now, there's very little difference between the producer grant and the on-farm research grant, save one defining factor. In the producer grant, that farmer is the project lead. He is the one that's doing the research. He's setting up the project. He's actually running the project, and he's doing it. On the on-farm research grant, a third party is running the project on your farm. So it could be, for example, Southern University running a project on a farm in Baton Rouge. It could be Tuskegee running a research project on a farmer's farm in Alabama. That is the main difference, is that the farm is not doing the research. The farm is letting somebody come in and use their farm to do the research project. And usually it is a project that the farmer wants done, but for whatever reason, they may not want to do the research. They may not feel comfortable with the scope of it, whatever. They may they'll invite somebody in, or the third party will come in and say, hey, look, I got an idea, or I want to grow taro down here in the South. Can we do a project on your farm? That's the main difference, is who's carrying out that research. I think the on-farm research are $25,000, $30,000 if there's an additional farm for up to a 2-year project. Pretty much everything else is the same in terms of what's allowable, in terms of what can be paid for. We're still going to look to see that labor costs are covered on. And we're really going to be looking at, once again, how those farmers are being compensated. Because if a third party's coming in for my farm, for example, they're going to have to compensate me money for taking my time and using my land and that type of stuff. So we look for that stuff. And not only do we look to see that they're being compensated, we look to seeing that they're compensated fairly. That's the big thing. I'm sure you've all heard of situations where somebody will come in and just throw you what they find on the bottom of their shoe. No, we're going to look to see, are you compensating this what we feel to be a fair amount for this compensation, this farmer's time, effort, and input into this project. So that's one thing, once again, we're going to look at in the context of these projects. Those two projects are probably the bread and butter of what we have for producers. And I wish that you would take a look at it. I cannot write a grant for you, but you can certainly say, hey, Miss Felicia, I got an idea for a project. You and Miss Felicia can get on the phone for me and we can talk your idea through. And I said, I don't know if that's something we can fund. For example, unfortunately, we are just starting to dip in our toe into the water funding youth-oriented projects. But as a rule, we typically have not funded youth-oriented projects in the past. And that's probably something, unless it's something really unique, like the tree farmers project I told you about, that we probably would shy away from. But you may have an idea for another project. You may have an idea for another project and you just want to see, okay, before I spend all this time, is it a good product? I could certainly get on the horn and have a discussion with you to say, yeah, this is good, or even you need to tweak it. The one thing, and I'm going to give our website again, is Southern SARE, SARE.org. Every project we have ever funded for the last 30 years, their project reports are online. So if you are thinking about a project, let's say you want to do a project, GOAT is a good one. I'll use GOAT. Let's say you have an idea. I would strongly encourage you to go up there and enter in and search for projects with GOAT to see if we've done anything with that particular subject already. And it doesn't mean that we won't fund it. There may be differences in your project and what we've funded already, but it shows us that you went out and looked to see what prior research was out there. And I would encourage, I'm going to be honest, I don't see the amount of applications that I would like to see from Black and brown producers. It's getting better. It's getting better since I took this job. It's getting better, but we're not where we need to be. So I want to see, A, just an increase in applications from you all, and B, an increase in successful applications, because the thing you have to consider is you may apply, you may not, it may not get funded the first year. And I always tell people, don't get discouraged, because that first time you're doing, you're trying to get the money, but you're really learning how to write a grant, because no matter if we fund it or if we don't fund it, you will get feedback on your project. And if you do submit a grant and it does not get funded, look at those responses that you get back, or call the people up and find out what you could have done to push you over the finish line. And what you should, we're not here to deny people money. We really want to see, especially Black and brown and BIPOC farmers, get this money. There's some states out there that I would love to see us get more, both producer grant applications for. Mississippi, for example, we just don't have a good track record in Mississippi for a variety of reasons. Some of that's cultural, some of that's due to the, just the things that are culturally relevant about Mississippi. But we don't, that's no excuse to us. We want to see funding going into these areas and getting into the hands of Black and brown farmers. So those are the two. We do have other grants, but those are the two that that Miss Felicia wanted me to concentrate on. So before I go, in the next few minutes I have left, I want to tell you about some other things aside from my grant programs that I think it's important for you to know about. And that's through our outreach effort. So at the end of each year, we get what's called de-obligated funds. And what is that? That's just basically money that for whatever reason we haven't spent. Either a grant didn't use as much money as they thought they were going to use, or the project didn't get carried out at all. With COVID, this will especially touch home. We set aside a fairly significant budget for travel each year. Well, for 2 years, we weren't going anywhere. I was walking from my office to my kitchen and to my bedroom sometimes, take a nap. But that money didn't get spent. So when that happens, we have two things we can do. We can send it back to DC, and we don't want to do that. Boo, no boo, not back to DC. or we can find a way to utilize that money for the benefit of farmers. And that's what we do. So we generally split that money up into two different pots. The first pot is what's known as travel scholarships. So this is money that groups or farmers can approach us to attend events. So a big one for those of you on the phone, you may remember Southern SARE. We funded a lot of travel scholarships for people to attend Southern SARE. There may be a workshop somewhere that a group of farmers, say in Alabama or Mississippi, feel that would be a benefit for some of their producers to get to. Well, funding is an issue. You can approach us about using that funds to get folks to that conference. Unfortunately, it's reimbursement only. That's federal regs. That's not us. If it was up to me, we front the money up front. And that's something we're looking at, because sometimes that's, especially when you're talking about underserved and minority communities, that's still an issue, to try and come up with that funding up front. But that funding is there. Typically what we try and do is work with the 18. So we try and work with somebody who has deep pockets that can get folks there and can afford to be reached. So that's the first part of money. The second part of money is what we call our educational and conference sponsorship support. So this is money that we use to support conferences. A lot of folks are starting to have their in-person conferences. We were just at the Georgia Organics Conference this past weekend. First time they had it in person in 2 years. So things are starting to loosen up a little bit. So we provide money to help those folks put those conferences on. But it's not just conferences. It can be a field day or a workshop. Miss Felicia was kind enough a couple years ago to I came down and we just did a round robin and visited farmers around the state of Mississippi. And I walked onto this farmer's land, and she can call a name, I can't. But I walked in, all the farmers' fields were bare. They had finished their harvesting, the crops were done. And I said, well, where's your cover crops? Farmer didn't know what was cover crops were. So we engaged with Miss Felicia to do a workshop, a field day on that farmer's farm around cover crops. Actually, we've done it in a couple of, we've done it in Mississippi and South Carolina. But we come in there, we provided the seed. Miss Felicia was able to get the machinery we needed to get that cover crop planted. And we had an educational session about what cover crops are and why you should be planting them and what's the different. We can fund those type of things, workshops, field days, educational. We've done a lot of stuff around heirs property and doing wills and stuff like that. I want to stress that both the travel scholarships and the sponsorships are not grants. They are not grant programs. Our grant programs are competitive. You have to submit it. You have to do certain things, and you are graded and matched against some of the other applicants. This is not the case with this funding. If you have to fill out a form, it's like 3 pages. You have to put out just a basic budget. And if we have the money, and it has to apply to some aspect of sustainable agriculture, which I've seen very little that does it. If it meets our requirements in terms of what the subject matter is, and we have the money, which most of the time we do, we will typically fund that. There's been very few instances that I know of where we've actually said no, and usually it's because it was just a program that didn't meet our requirements, or it was something we weren't allowed to fund and stuff like that. So I really want you to take that away with you as well, that there's some money. And what I tell people is, if you're looking to do something, so for example, we've funded a lot of work around heirloom collards. We just helped to fund the publication of a book on collard greens, the green of the South. And it not only talks about the history behind it and the culinary, but a lot of it's just keeping that history alive. But that all started with a sponsorship grant. We got all these people together in the room. They did, like Mama Ira of Southern Seed Exposure. We got these people in the room and got them talking. And it's also a great way, if you're not quite ready to apply for a grant, if your project can be reduced to a field day or some sort of educational thing that you can then build upon to actually write a grant, it's a great way to get started with us. So that's the travel scholarships and the conference and education sponsorships. Keep that in mind. Ms. Felicia has worked with us on these programs, so she can do it. The last two things I want to tell you about, we have a program that actually was birthed by COVID. And that's our Sustainable Ag Leadership Program. So once again, we had all of this money left over primarily from travel, and that we would have been spending on conferences or travel scholarships that if we didn't do something, we would have had to send it back to DC. So we set up this program called the Sustainable Ag Leadership Program. And basically what it is, we ask for self-identified leaders. If you feel that you're a leader in your community when it comes to agriculture and food systems, you can submit an application when the program opens. Tell us about yourself, and you can apply for up to $3,000 to do your own project, ag leadership project in your community. And we just selected the members of our fourth cohort, our fourth class. This program has been so successful. So remember, I said that we used to sort of fund this out of money that came back to us, and we didn't really. But the problem with that, you don't know how much you're going to get from year to year, depending upon what you spend. So, one year you might be able to fund 3 of those, another year you might be able to fund 10. But we like the program so much that we actually made this a line item in our budget, which means every year when we do our budget, we fund this program. It's a permanent program. It typically opens up around November of each year. With funding, we're going to be starting to fund stuff probably in the next couple of weeks. I think we have 8 people in a cohort, and the projects are pretty interesting. There's a woman in Puerto Rico who's looking at working with farmers around more traditional farmers markets type things, which is pretty important in Puerto Rico. We have an alumni who did a project around making sure that farmers had wills and stuff. It was a whole heirs property project. So that will open up again in November. And the last 3 things that I've told you about are not grant programs. So I want you to understand that even if you don't know, I want you guys to apply for grants now. I do. But if you're not ready for that, there are other ways that we can engage with you, and there are other ways that we see that we can get funding into communities that really need. And lastly, I want to tell you about our publications. So when you go to our website, Southern SARE, SARE.org, there is a publications tab that we produce a wide variety of both hardcover books and what we call topic bulletins that cover a wide range of very useful farming information. So we have, for example, what a lot of people consider the Bible on cover crops. It basically breaks down what cover crops are, what you can use in your area, what benefits it brings to the soil, when you should grow them, when you should terminate them, because that's important in cover crops, and just all that. And it's a very easy to thing. And I think the book's about 200 pages, but it has a lot of tables and stuff. So you don't have to sit there and read a bunch of stuff. If you want to look at, for example, Southern bee and its use as a cover crop, you go right to the table, and it said it's a nitrogen fixer, and this is when you should terminate it, and all that good stuff. We have a book on legal structures for those of you who are forming your farming businesses. We have a 400-page book on legal structures, thinking about as you form, and I know Ms. Felicia's big on this, is as you form your farming business, are you setting it up in a way that protects you, that guarantees that you are protected from all sorts of potential liabilities, and it's something that you could share with your families down the road. So there's that book. All of the books are available free for that. Well, I always say free, but it's not really free. Your tax dollars have paid for this, but you can download them at no cost from the website. But for those of you like me, sometimes you don't want to read a 300-page book on the computer. We do make these books available, especially to groups. If you're having any type of educational event, Miss Felicia, for example, if she is having a workshop on legal structures for businesses, she called me up and said, Brennan, I'm having a class with 20 people. Can you send me 20 copies? And we can do that. And then when you see us at conferences, we typically have copies that we can give away. So I couldn't have timed this better, Miss Felicia. It is 3:59. You asked for an hour, and I want to thank you and your listeners again for having me and let me run my mouth for an hour.
I appreciate you, Mr. Brennan. Thank you so much for just giving us that rundown of all the grants. Do you have a few more minutes for a clarifying question?
Sure.
So when we talked about the producer grant and the on-farm grant, what if we have some producers that say, I don't want to tackle writing this myself. I just don't feel comfortable. Is it possible within their budget to have a line item to pay for a grant writer?
Well, the quick and dirty answer is no. But there's ways you can work around it, and I have to see it on a case-by-case basis. The 1890s now should be able to help a lot of folks out with grant writing. And what I'm finding, Felicia, and I'd like to come back on to your group at some point to talk about all this money that's being put out on the street for livestock, meat and poultry processing. And what we're seeing now is that USDA has finally loosened up on being able to pay folks to write grants, but to be on a case-by-case basis. As for ours, we have to look at the situation. Usually the answer is no, but there's some things we can do to work around that.
Okay, I appreciate that. The other question I have is time frame. So you did give the website. We'll give it again. It's SARE, SARE.org. When our farmers go to that website and that particular grant opportunity opens up, what is the time frame from that open call to deadline? Is it a few months? Do they have 6 months? So we could give our listeners kind of a heads up on how much time they need to start thinking about their proposal as well as writing it.
Yeah. Thanks, Felicia. And that's something I neglected, so I'm glad you brought that out. Producer grant opens up September of every year, and they're typically due in November. So you're probably looking at 10 weeks from the time the grant opens till the time it has to be submitted. The on-farm research grant opens up like the month after. So it opens up in October with a December due date. But one thing I want to add, anybody who's listened to this and they go to our website and think, hey, I have some ideas. Now's the time to be thinking about it. I will entertain any questions. The earlier you could start to form your grant ideas in your mind, when it comes time, when that call opens, you'll be much better prepared than 90% of the people.
Thank you. And I would just tell our listeners, first question was case-by-case basis to hire a grant writer. Then our second question is the time frame. So you have 10 weeks, few, it's not a lot.
Yeah.
So I would ask our listeners to start thinking about your ideas now. Those months are set for these particular opportunities to open. So you just said September, October. So you already know in advance. So I would be now writing, start putting your ideas down on paper, start going to your various ag professionals at your land grant universities to assist you. But I would start now. Don't wait till September, October to start trying to write your proposal. Start now so you can get the adequate help you need. So, Mr. Brennan, I thank you always for your time, your energy. You work so hard to assist our farmers. And I want people to take heed to what Mr. Brennan said about the various states as well as people that are not applying. Please apply. This is an opportunity. It's one of few in the country that you as a farmer, a producer, can actually apply for. Most proposals you cannot apply as an individual or a farm entity. So please take heed to SARE's programs. And again, the website is SARE.org. Please go there. But you have Mr. Brennan Washington there within SARE. You have me here at NCAT. So if you have any questions about their website, once you go there, please reach out to us. Don't wait till September, October. Reach out to us, get these questions answered, as well as get people looking at your proposal. So, Mr. Brennan, do you have any
No,
closing remarks?
that's it. There is a lot of, and Sarah is, I'll close with this. Writing a grant, I'm not going to lie to you, it can be intimidating if you've never done it with it before, but practice makes perfect. First time, if you played football, the first time you got on that field was intimidating. Same thing with baseball, and anything that you've done the first time, it's intimidating. What we want to help you do, me and Miss Felicia, is for you to become trained and to become skilled. So, if you apply for no other reason, just to get your grant writing muscles built up, that's what we're here for. And I would like, our grants are fairly simple compared to other USDA grants, but the USDA has just put a ton of money out on the street, and it's very important. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's going to be important for us to build these muscles, because too often we are left behind when that money gets put out. And that's not going to be the case with Miss Felicia and I to help it. So thank you, Miss Felicia.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brennan. Again, this was our weekly Wednesday workshop, first of many for 2023. And our first person was Mr. Brennan Washington with SARE, our ag professional. So please stay tuned, be looking out for these particular opportunities. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.